All right, welcome to another episode of Justice for Y'all. As always, I'm Paul Painter here with Andrew Bowen and Stephen Morrison.
As you always.
As you always. All right, how you guys doing?
Doing good. It's a beautiful fall day. Finally got a little cool weather. I noticed you're wearing your vest
I'm
today.
invested. Yes,
You are
I'm invested.
I'm just inflannelled. Like a good jury.
There you
I've been inflannelled.
God. I think we got to
go
wait
on.
for those jokes
Oh,
until
at
Andrew
the
does them
end.
at the end. Yeah.
My bad, Andrew.
Yeah, don't step on my thing.
Oh, well, before we get going, the important question of the afternoon, as we like our Friday afternoon podcasting. Stephen, as the chief beverage officer of Bowen Painter, what are we drinking this afternoon?
We are drinking a Bardstown Bourbon Company Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It is the Origin Series. It's been something that I wanted to try. I went on a bourbon trail tour, and we didn't make it by Bardstown, so I saw this bottle. I had a different one in mind, but it just spoke to me. I like the labeling on it, and Bardstown's starting to do some pretty good stuff from what I hear, and my taste buds so far, they are in agreement.
This is a cool bottle. What's on the back of it? Can't tell.
It
Looks like some marshland with a duck.
Yeah, okay, I see it now.
Yeah, one of them had kind of like a wheat stalk on it. Oh, this is a good sound. Oh, it's nice.
There it is.
It's nice.
Can't put the smell over the air, but
No, you have to be a live in studio guest to get the smell.
it was a good choice.
Thank
Good
you.
choice.
Thank you.
Really
I take all
fuels the podcast.
I take everything very seriously. All my responsibilities.
So today we're going to talk about something that happened a week ago today, and it was the first annual, I'll call it,
That's right. Inaugural, in fact.
the inaugural. That's right. Maritime Law CLE Conference that was here in Savannah, as part of the Federal Bar Association, put on a seminar, and Stephen and I were co-chairs of it. Along with Todd Bade and Colin McRae, but Stephen really led the whole thing and was in charge and put on just a great conference, and it was so good that we got everybody who attended. We had a lot of attendees that talked to us. Really hope we do it again next year, and I think we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
You're tuned into the podcast where justice meets Southern hospitality. Broadcasting directly from Savannah, Georgia, join your hosts, Paul, Stephen, and Andrew of Bowen Painter Trial Lawyers as they chat about the legal difficulties you might face in everyday life. From the ports of Savannah to the busy highways that stretch through the southeast, we're your go-to source for all things legal. Served up with a dose of Southern charm and commitment to justice for y'all.
Again.
Yeah. No, we got a lot of great feedback, and it didn't take long. It was on the first couple of panels. So that's the folks we have to thank. People were asking, hey, is this going to be an annual thing? How often are we going to do this?
Yeah.
We had about 50 lawyers from everywhere, all the way, I believe, from Texas up to Virginia come.
Somebody from New York was there too.
Yeah, New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of
From
folks.
Florida and
Yeah, Florida. We had
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Yeah, a good maritime hub. A lot of Miami folks. So-
Charleston.
Charleston. Yeah, that was really good. We had a whole crew to come down from Charleston. It was great. I mean, that's one of the things I love about the FBA and why I've been a part of it. What I like about our involvement is it does not always get heavy representation from the plaintiff side, although I think there's a little bit of a misconception there. My experience has been when you start asking folks what they do, I found a lot more plaintiff side practitioners, and I think it's important for that perspective to be represented, and it was well represented here, and it was a really good event.
Yeah, it's a neat bar because we practice in maritime law, but a lot of our practices are in different areas where, the bar is larger, like more lawyers as part of a bar, we'll say trucking or auto wrecks or med mal, than there is in maritime. And each kind of section, for people who aren't lawyers, each types of law, you call them, each of them have their own bars. And
We can go where a bar comes from. I mean, a lot of people might think it's because lawyers like to drink at bars, which is not untrue, but that's not where it comes from.
it's not?
No, right. It's a disappointment to the world out there. But just a quick footnote here from history is there literally used to be a bar in court, and in some courts there still is.
Again, not a drinking bar.
Again, not a drinking bar.
Yeah.
Maybe not a drinking bar, but in terms of official proceedings, basically those who were allowed to go and present cases before the court had to be admitted to the bar because they're the ones allowed past the bar. So
Right.
that's what.
And it's basically a wooden fence
Yep.
in the courtroom with a gate that you walk through, and that's coming past the bar in the courtroom.
It has its roots in ecclesiastical history, and this podcast could get real interesting and take a historical turn. Maybe we'll save that for another one. But it's a fascinating kind of vestige of history. But to your point, the bar itself is sort of a representation of the community of lawyers and judges too.
Now, there are state bars, and traditionally you've had to take a bar exam to be admitted to practice in one of the several states. But the Bar Association we're talking about, the Federal Bar Association, and the Admiralty Bar, which is not necessarily an official bar, but the Admiralty Bar does not require a bar exam to be a member of them.
Right. So I guess really the way to put it is any group of lawyers is called a bar. We're like a murder of crows.
Yes. Yeah, our image problem isn't helped by calling us a murder of lawyers. So yeah, it's better to just call us a bar. It's more fitting for a lot of reasons.
So yeah, you have these official bars like the FBA, and then you have sort of unofficial bars of people who practice in one practice area or another. And each one, when we talk about those unofficial bars, each one sort of has their own feel, and it's the level of collegiality, sometimes the level of law practice.
There's
Sometimes
the
level
criminal bar,
Yeah.
the plaintiff's bar,
Right.
and you can be a member of the plaintiff's bar and also a member of the Admiralty Bar.
Right.
And again, it's not an official membership. It's just
So like
are you part of that group?
Admiralty is a type of, like a section of the law
Right.
where plaintiff is which side, who do you represent within that?
Right.
And so I mention all that just because the Maritime Bar, people who practice maritime law, is a pretty small group nationally. And most people know each other and having cases with each other, certainly within the geographic area that was represented last week. And it's a very collegial bar. I mean, I think there weren't even like kind of the joking between sides of
Yeah.
your plaintiff, your defendant. People are, it's just one big bar, which is really
nice.
it is really nice. I think it's the way that things used to be, not even that too terribly long ago, where people were more general practitioners and they would get along, because we certainly deal with some other lawyers and there's not much collegiality going on there. We try to be that way, but it's a different thing. But anyway,
It takes two to tango when it comes to that.
But I thought that was pretty neat. And we're going to talk a little bit today. We had so much fun at it that we want to talk about some of the things we learned and some of the things that people talked about. And we're going to do it from memory. We don't have all the papers in front of us. And
You have your notes.
Well, I left them at the house, unfortunately. Yeah, I took copious notes.
Yeah, on the Bowen Painter pins that we handed out.
We did. We handed out some swag. That was Steven's idea. I'm really, really good in the marketing.
Yeah. I'm trying to get every angle we can, and people took them. So I hope they're enjoying them. They're nice pins. So I will say one more thing just about the Admiralty Bar that we saw there. With the reason that the FBA puts this on is Admiralty law. We talked about this before, but Admiralty law happens a lot in federal court. It is an area of exclusive federal jurisdiction, with the exceptions that certain claims that could have been brought at what we call common law, kind of early American and English law, can be kept in state court. So I mean that's another episode right there. But for the most part, a lot of Admiralty cases are being conducted in federal court. There are specific Admiralty claims that you can bring only in federal court, and if you have a claim like a collision between a ship and another ship, then
As opposed to
it's alley and oop, as opposed to an allision, which this is kind of maritime talk. So a collision is when two moving objects hit each other, and allision is when one moving object hits a stationary object. So everyone out there can now sound very intelligent and know like they're an Admiralty lawyer by saying that the Key Bridge incident that happened with the Dali was not a collision with the bridge; it was in fact an allision. Yeah. So just a little tidbit, everybody take home. Write that down with your Bowen Painter pen.
Write that down.
Damn, that's strong.
That's strong. Got to tell that story at some point. That may be a whole episode.
Yes.
Anyway,
So what are some of the topics that you guys remember just off the top of your head? But I think it's a good way to talk about it.
well,
What stood out?
I want to start with yours because I think we were talking about you started getting into the history of maritime law, and yours was really deeply rooted in history. But I thought it was really interesting, and what just tell us a little bit about. So first of all, the way this was set up is we had the people who were the chairs also hosted panels of speakers, and so we would we be the moderator and sometimes presenting, sometimes adding, but also have some other people with us. So Stephen had a panel, and talk about yours.
Sure. My panel was called the 13th Colony Law and Lore. So Georgia is the 13th colony and has a rich history, period. We live in Savannah, where it's a tourist hub because of the rich history that we have here. But it turns out, pertinent to this conference, that we have a pretty rich maritime history. And so I wanted to show everyone how the Southern District of Georgia, which is the 43 counties in the Southern District that are composed the entirety of the Southern District. I wanted to show that we do have a rich history because we had a lot of folks from these traditional maritime hubs like Miami, Norfolk,
New Orleans.
That where those are the places where a lot of maritime law happens. But the Southern District can hold its own when it comes to that history. So I wanted to figure out a way to kind of show that off. So I started digging into what are some of the early cases that happened here, what's kind of the interesting history, and it really kind of starts just with the history of the Southern District of Georgia. So the Southern District of Georgia, the federal courts are they are courts that are one of the three branches of the federal government. And in 1789, the Judiciary Act, so after we have the Constitution, get it ratified, we now have these federal courts, and Congress had to act to define the jurisdiction for those courts because unlike state courts, federal courts have limited jurisdiction. The government says, these are the kind of cases that you have control over, admiralty being one of them, cases involving claims in the sea and on the navigable waters. So our Southern District of Georgia is one of the original district courts from the Judiciary Act of 1789. So there's a lot of history right there. What does that mean? There was actually no Southern District when it first started. It was just the District of Georgia. Over time, the state of Georgia grew, so they split it into smaller ones, Northern District, Middle District, Southern District. And then now the Southern District is the traditional seat of that original District of Georgia. So I went back to find some early cases, and I found that, first of all, we are very spoiled these days to have a lot of judicial written opinions kind of explaining what the judge's thoughts were, how they arrived at the analysis that they did. In the 18th century, and really into the 19th century, courts were not, especially the district courts, were not doing a tremendous amount of writing about their thoughts. They were mostly holding trial and conducting proceedings from the bench. So what the early records that I found were mostly just bills. So whenever you had what they call a libel against a ship, which just means that it's a claim against the ship, somebody got hurt or cargo got damaged, somebody would literally sue the ship. And then basically they would go to trial. It wasn't a long, drawn-out discovery process in the motion practice that we see today in federal courts. It was straight to the trial before the judge. And being in admiralty law, there is no jury. So the judge makes the decision. But then once the judge makes the decision, if the judge decides that this ship is responsible for the injury, then somebody's got to pay for the costs. And one of the interesting things is what the costs were. So you had the attorney general had somebody who showed up for a court. That person got compensated. The clerk had to get compensated for the court's time. And then, of course, the party for the various damages and costs involved. So I saw a lot of these early kind of bills. It was interesting to see names of folks that I had seen on gravestones in our local cemeteries and some of these early practitioners. And then, of course, you get the judges. So one of the earliest judges that I could find, a lot of admiralty activity kind of around the turn of the 18th or 19th century, was Judge Stevens. And Judge Stevens is buried right there in Colonial Cemetery, which was just a couple blocks away from where we had the seminar. So I talked a little bit about him. One of his predecessors, Judge Pendleton, was actually Alexander Hamilton's second in the duel with Aaron Burr. So he was there when Alexander Hamilton died. And then you have judges that served in the Revolutionary War, and these heroes who are really there they're one of the original 13 colonies. They are defining the law of the nation, and our Southern District was right at the heart of that.
That's pretty cool. And, you'd gone to the Georgia Historical Society and gotten some photographs of these actual complaints that were filed in the court that had somehow found their way to the Historical Society, but it was pretty neat. It was all, calligraphy and these.
Yeah, you see the handwriting.
Yeah, they look like scrolls instead of paper. But it's very good handwriting.
Oh, it's incredible handwriting.
I would never have made it as a lawyer in those days.
Not just the fact of you're handwriting this and just the kind of the calligraphy work, but even just how straight it was without any lined paper. That alone was fascinating. it came from the papers of an early attorney called Richard Montgomery Stites, also buried in Laurel Grove North, which is another really beautiful cemetery in our area. And I'll tell you that the two things that I really enjoy talking about with Mr. Stites, whose paper, the reason that we had these documents is because my assumption is he had his law practice in his files that were passed on, and then eventually somebody said, hey, these are of historical significance. They give them the Georgia Historical Society. That's what I was able to go through. And one of the cases that I found was about this ship called the Beaver. And there was a gentleman, Mr. Tyson, who was actually from Maryland, who chartered the ship, the Beaver, to carry some cargo. I think it involved some doubloons and then cargo worth $600 or $700. So back then, a lot of money. And that ship actually got taken as a prize wrongfully by a Spanish privateer masquerading as a French ship, flying a French flag. And there were some proceedings down in one of the Caribbean jurisdictions. The governors, royal governors down there basically said that wasn't right. So Mr. Tyson had to come in and preserve his claim of the loss of his cargo due to the privateer action. So Mr. Stites got involved as his attorney and was helping put together the paperwork. And one of the really interesting things, talk about practice back then, is the size of an affidavit and just the formality of it. I mean, now you and I can have a paralegal throw together an affidavit and put an electronic signature on it. It's pretty simple. It doesn't have to be notarized. Mr. Stites was a notary public. It was a very important role to sort of say, this is officially signed by this person. I was there to see it. And so he found his seal and a lot of really interesting things about that. But the affidavit was about the size of a big old newspaper. So yeah, just kind of interesting history to go back and then to get to kind of put my hands on some of these documents was really cool.
That was cool. And you had Judge Cheesebro, magistrate judge, who is based in Brunswick, just down the coast from us, and he was on your panel, and I liked his talk a lot because he talked about the Georgia coast and all the things that the Georgia coast offers, from the ports, which is huge business. I mean, it's the largest single owner operated container port in North America and third busiest port in the country. And from that to the federal seashores and Georgia's barrier islands to just all kinds of things that I thought were really fascinating. And it really, I think a lot of the people in that room who were, from New York or Texas, that kind of stuff, Georgia, he put it, I really like the way he put it. He said, Georgia's got about 100 miles of coastline, and it's often forgotten about because we don't have as many, beaches, as much coastline as Florida, as many beaches as South Carolina, that kind of stuff. And he said, but we really punch above our weight class because of all the stuff we have. And when he went over everything that the Georgia coast does, you realize that it's really a powerhouse. And I think even those of us living here kind of forget that sometimes.
And speaking to that, there are 14 barrier islands down that 100 miles of coastline. Right. And 7 of them are undeveloped. Yeah. And can only be reached by boat. There's not roads to them. So you got Cumberland and Sapelo and Blackbeard and Little St. Simons,
St. Catharines,
Ossabaw, Wausau. All of those are
good Georgia boys you're able to name. The 14 barrier islands.
But
we've probably all been to all of them.
All of those islands that are not accessible are very pristine and beautiful. But that's part of the reason. Where they all developed, you'd have all these beaches that would be tourist destinations.
Yeah. I don't even like you talk about it. Anybody listening, do not move to Savannah so you can take your boat.
Yeah, Hilton Head is where all the beaches are.
Yeah, you can have an entire beach to yourself in the middle of the summer around the Atlantic. Don't come. It's really not that great.
No.
I tell you,
kind of sad.
Another conversation on another panel I thought was interesting was the discussion about limitation of liability. Yeah. Because that is sort of in the news with the Dolly elision with the bridge in Baltimore.
What is limited liability? Because that's something that's pretty foreign to folks.
Yeah. So, just taking that as an example, the owners of that ship went and filed a case before any plaintiff, before any injured party could go sue them, and what they filed was a limitation of liability action, and there are some things they have to show, but if they're successful in showing those things, their liability, the amount they're obligated to pay for this disaster, is limited to the value of the ship and its cargo.
Less the salvage costs.
And, that's huge because, how much was that ship worth? I mean, it was, $20 million, something like that. I mean, it wasn't.
The Dolly?
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit more than that, but it was close. I don't think it was 9-figure, but it was.
But it pales in comparison to the injury claims, the economic claims, the value, the bridge that was knocked down.
which could hit $1 billion.
Right.
It's huge. So it's really weird because the defendant sues the plaintiffs, and they want to sue everybody they can think of who may have a claim so they can limit their liability.
Right. Now they do have to show that basically they have to show that this disaster was not caused by anything that they knew of or should have known of that resulted in the elision with the bridge. So
Which is going to be really hard.
it is going to be hard. If you remember, the Dolly lost power
Right.
and lost steerageway, and that's why it ran into the bridge. And apparently there was a massive power failure. So they're going to have to show that they were maintaining the ship perfectly in regards to its power, and that they didn't have any notice or knowledge of any problems with that.
I
Which
think they gotta
is my
go-
understanding that's going to be difficult for them to show.
I think I go further and also show were they manned correctly to why was there nobody in aft steering to be able to steer the ship when the power goes down with auxiliary power? I mean, I haven't heard the answer to that, but
Right.
Just because you lose power in a ship does not necessarily mean you can't steer the ship.
Right. And
They're
if you,
designed with fallbacks. Good.
well, no, and if you kind of knew you were having issues, you even set sail that day. And then there's going to be some interesting questions of fact, really about their knowledge, the degree of it. The judge is the one who decides that. I looked it up. The owner's limitation action said the ship, the limitation should be 44 million. I tend to think that probably favors the ship owners, so I don't know exactly what the response to that is. But one of the things that I learned that I really wasn't aware of about the Limitation of Liability Act is it doesn't apply to the federal government. So one of the big headlines not too long ago was that the federal government, Department of Justice, that has an admiralty division, that actually several representatives came and were on our panels and spoke about the Dolly and other things, within the bounds of what they were able to do given the pending litigation. But the federal government is not subject to the Limitation of Liability Act. So even if they're able to kind of cabin their liability as to the workers on the bridge who died as a result of the elision, or the other folks in the city of Baltimore, whoever else might have a claim, the federal government is able to sidestep that with their civil penalties and the affirmative action they filed to recover the costs. I believe the Corps of Engineers who were involved in kind of reopening the channel and cost about $100 million.
Let's talk about another disaster people talked about, the Golden Ray.
Oh yeah,
And
that was even
that
more.
story was amazing. So anybody don't know, the Golden Ray was this a row ship, roll on roll off ship, which carries vehicles, and had gone into the port of Brunswick, 60 miles south of Savannah. And
Also a massive and impressive port in its own right. Even though it's kind of overshadowed because Savannah's big, but
Right.
Brunswick is a powerhouse.
yeah, and still within the Port Authority of Georgia. And anyway, so they're the main the vehicle shipping. So if somebody, the Jaguars being sent over come to Brunswick and get taken off, and they roll them on, roll it off.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So much so that they've actually moved all of the railroad business out of Savannah.
Yeah.
Savannah used to have some of it.
Right.
And so now right there at Ocean Terminal, I believe, they've shut that part down and are expanding the container port there.
So the Golden Ray had been to port and was leaving, and as I recall, so let's talk about ballast. In a ship, ballast is important, and they have these tanks on the bottom of the ship that can hold fuel, they can hold water. I mean, not the same tank, but like you need to.
Yeah, you get water in your fuel, you get a different kind of problem.
Right, but you have water that takes on, so the ship can be balanced in the way it goes and be deep enough, because if the ship isn't loaded down, then you need to bring on the water to ballast and sink the ship so it'll properly operate. And if it's too high, or if there's too much weight on one side or the other, then it has a risk of tipping off. And so this was leaving, and it turned out one of the readouts for one of the tanks was incorrect, and the engineer thought there was X amount of ballast, but it was actually much lower than that. And so it got to the point as the ship, it starts leaning over, it starts listing to one side.
And if you've seen one of these ro-ro ships, they're very tall.
Yeah.
And in that massive ship are tiers or decks that are loaded with cars.
Yeah, they're more top heavy
And
than
they're
a normal
very
ship.
top heavy, yeah.
And so they're going around. I'm not sure if they were going around a corner. They just started listing for some reason. I'm not sure how it started, but they got to a point where it can normally recover from that. I think it was about 17 degrees of list, but it didn't, and it kept going over to the side. And the pilot, the person who takes the ship in and out of port, who lives there in Brunswick, very, consciously took the ship out of the
shipping
channel,
lane, the channel,
and took it over in shallow water. So when it finally keeled over and landed on its side, half underwater, it's in the shallow water. Otherwise, if it gone over there, the ship might have sank. It probably would have sank, and then you also have blocked a major shipping channel.
Yeah.
So there's
and you
all
would
kinds
have
of problems.
You would have had more loss of life,
And you would have more loss of life. But the big story that I thought was amazing.
Yeah, this is good.
And this was told. We had Lee Willett, who's the senior investigating officer for the U.S. Coast Guard down here. He's a civilian, but he investigates these things. And he said that they figured out that in the engine room, there were several people in the engine room that were trapped there. And there's an escape hatch, but the escape hatch was going down the starboard side of the ship. Well, the starboard side of the ship was underwater, and so they couldn't get out. So it's, the weather's hot. It's 135 degrees in this ship because obviously the power's out. There's no air. They're locked in there.
They're in the engine room, which is always is going to be hot.
Right. It's dark, and it's partially filled with water that's filled with all the oil from the engine and everything. And they were in there for what, like 3 days?
Yeah, it was a
55
long time.
hours.
Yeah,
And
I think that's about right.
But once they realized they couldn't get to them, the rescuers were going to have to cut a hole in I think it was in the stern of the ship to get to them. But because they didn't know because the engine's there, whether there was fuel that was combustible in the air
Or
and
other
if they tried
fumes.
right.
That was a big concern.
And if
So
they tried to
just-
weld, it could have ignited inside and killed everybody instantly. So they had to
Just a
figure out
giant
this way.
blowtorch that can't just go flying through the
He showed
hole.
me the pictures afterwards, and I wish they were put up for everybody. But it basically took like a big, imagine a hole punch for paper, and like punched a series of holes in a circle. You can see about beer can size, and they go all around until they could open them up and get them out. He said he's got one of those punched out metal
Little
holes,
plugs.
with those plugs.
Nice
That he's
paperweight.
got on his desk with paperweight. Which I was like, that is amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, I'll tell you another interesting fact about that is so the ship is laying there in shallow water, and it's massive. Even on its side, it's like a large building sticking out of the water. Yeah. They had to cut it into pieces. And so what they did is they made these huge lifts, this structure to go over the ship, and they got a huge chain and used that chain as basically a saw and just ran that chain around the ship constantly. They didn't do it at night because it was close to a lot of residential neighborhood. And they
Yeah,
could
I can
hear-
imagine the noise would have been.
But it's just this huge noise just constantly, and that chain sawed the ship in half. Now my friend,
I think it maybe in a couple of sections. I remember.
yeah, several sections.
And like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So I was at Delbert Bland's house a few months ago, and he lives right there on the Sound, St. Simon Sound. And if you know Bland Farms, Vidalia Onion Company, that's their company. He's got a link from that chain.
Really?
Yeah, and it's massive. It weighs 100 pounds. One link.
Just
from
one
the
Oh
chain.
my God.
How big is it?
It's about that long.
Okay.
And about
like
2
about
feet.
that thick, just solid steel.
like a big old piece of salami. And I don't
Yeah.
know the video, but for folks who are listening, I mean that it's the size of Andrew's head.
And that's big.
Right.
It takes a lot to hold this brain.
Yeah, and you could saw a ship into several sections. Actually,
correct.
Yeah, you're just
right.
a
Just
little more
bang it out.
valuable than a link of chain. No, I loved kind of the visuals that we got, and that was hometown, right? I mean, my panel also had a couple of slightly older cases, but one involving a
Canoodling on a shrimp boat.
canoodling on a shrimp boat. Yeah, so it's basically I don't know. I think it was a collision between the shrimp boat and another boat, but basically
You got run over by a container ship coming in.
That's
because,
right.
Because
They
the,
cut
because
the boat in
because
half.
the shrimper
shrimp
was
boat
there with his girlfriend and they were distracted.
The shrimp boat captain and his girlfriend had gone below and left the steering wheel.
as David Sybil put it, they went below deck.
But they tied off the steering wheel with a rope, and so it was just chugging along and right
Redneck
into the path of
autopilot.
the ship.
I grew up on a shrimp boat, and that autopilot system is still in use in some instances for that and probably other purposes.
Right.
Well, we could go on with this forever, and we didn't even talk about the most important part, which was my panel, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, run us down.
No. I'll tell you what, that's safe for a whole nother episode, because some of the issues that we
That's a good
talked
point.
about were actually things that we'd like to talk about in our podcast, because it was more of a plaintiff's focused thing and talking about some real world events and how those things play out. So why don't we save that for a different time?
So
And
before we sign off,
hold on, you know what we haven't done? I'm going to say this. You're talking about suing the ship, right?
Oh,
right.
Well, you realize that would be a quasi in rem jurisdiction case.
would it be?
Does that allow you to potentially?
That's I just got to get some
There
Latin
it
in there.
is. Would it be quasi or would it be straight up in rem?
I think in rem has to be an actual piece of property like earth.
Like you're actually going? Oh, really?
You're going, or maybe if you're suing the ship, but not for the ship. Does that make sense? Like you're suing a
Yeah.
piece of property, like
You're suing the ship as like collateral for
Right,
other
for
damages.
something else.
But it's not the subject of the suit.
yeah. So in rem jurisdiction means you're suing over a thing, and then because the thing is located somewhere, that's why it has jurisdiction. It usually happens with property, but it comes with ships too. And
You're right. It would be.
I hadn't heard in rem jurisdiction since probably law school. And somebody brought it up at that conference. I was like, oh yeah, it's quasi in rem jurisdiction.
Well, that's a fun thing I think about admiralty law in a lot of ways. The history there.
Yeah.
It's one of the few places where I get to go and see Latin up on the slides. And as
Yeah.
a former student of the classics, it just makes my heart sing a little bit.
I really wished we had that. Or go ahead, Andrew. Our jingle,
In honor of the panel.
like I mean, we could have hit that button just all day
1,000
long.
times, yeah.
It would have just been
And
background.
just a reminder that is our Latin language flourish.
Listen, our tens of followers know that.
They're cute in.
So before we sign off, this is
Yeah.
today. We're recording this on November 15th. Excuse me. Mike Tyson takes the ring tonight.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
So in honor of Mike Tyson, I've got a joke. Did you know that Mike Tyson used to be a preacher?
No one
No.
done.
He used to punch people in the face.
I get it. With that.
Oh, and with that, we thank you for joining us again, and we'll see you next time on Justice for Y'all.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening to Justice for Y'all, hosted by the attorneys here at Bowen Painter Trial Lawyers in Savannah, Georgia. If today's episode resonated with you, or if you find yourself needing legal guidance, remember, we're just a call away. You don't have to work through the difficulties of your situation alone. Visit our website at bowenpainter.com, that's BOWENPAINTER.com, or give us a call at 912-335-1909. We're here to serve you with the dedication and warmth only true Southern hospitality can offer. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss an episode. And tell your friends and family about us if they're ever in need of some legal insight. Take care, and remember that at Bowen Painter Trial Lawyers, we're committed to justice for y'all.